Our reservoirs. I think we all know how extraordinary they are. This wide open space in the middle of a crowded city. Unlike Echo Park Lake, our reservoirs give us a little bit of wildness in our urban lives. They give us quiet, perspective, and the quality that the community has said it values most, serenity. They've been singled out nationally and internationally for their diversity of recorded wildlife, bird species, and plant varieties. Many of us here love the wildlife that share these reservoirs and neighborhood with us. But what does this wildlife need, perhaps most of all? They need us to give them space, to leave them alone to be wild, to be valued by us without disturbance. We can share space by taking the day while they take the night, or by giving birds wide spaces in the waters or among the trees. But if we overcrowd them with development or noise or human activities, they don't give warning. They will just be gone, as happened with our great blue herons after draining construction beneath their large rookery on West Silver Lake Drive. It took 2 years of quiet and refilled waters before they began to return, one pair at a time. And the space and quiet that our wildlife need are the very elements that are welcomed by people coming to the reservoirs. Not the buzz of a drone, but the buzz of a bee. So in thinking about the master plan and in thinking about changing our reservoirs, we feel like the guideline needs to be the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. Development must be carefully selected, planned, and constructed to avoid harm to the wildlife or the community. Okay, now I am going to try to share my screen with you. So this is the map, the master plan's final map of the reservoir. And please feel free to take a screenshot. This is a much more detailed map than the one that was sent out with the scoping comments. Now there's a lot here, and a lot of it is concrete. It could take anywhere from 2 to 16 years if it were all built. To do no harm to our wildlife and open vistas, we could choose only a limited number of their options. In our submitted comments, we asked the city to evaluate many of these options for their potential negative environmental impacts on wildlife, water, traffic congestion and pollution, land use, etc. We were also looking to identify and avoid any negative unintended consequences. When the city finishes its analysis and gives us the draft environmental impact report later this year, we'll have a better idea of what the impact could be and how they might be mitigated. But right now, we're looking to see if we can meet the goals of the master plan with alternatives that would cause far fewer negative impacts, that would do no harm. Because if so, our city council might welcome these alternatives. And we think we can. Let me give you some examples. Okay, let's just take a look at the knoll. The first project that immediately stands out is this one, the Environmental Education Center proposed for the base of the knoll. To construct this building would require extensive regrading and habitat destruction that could not be restored, despite potential restoration being mandated by the reservoir's historic cultural monument designation. It makes no sense to us to talk about environmental education when you're destroying the very environment you want to study. As many have said, nature is the classroom. So instead, how about this alternative? At the base of the knoll, instead of that building, there could be a creative free play area for children and an onshore educational bird viewing platform with free telescopes instead of a kayak launch site, this one here. Why bring kids from one indoor location to another? And why build a kayak launch site when the community has been clear about not wanting boating of any kind on our waters? This alternative would have very little impact and could free up education money for birding and wildlife docents, for nature trips with LAUSD's Office of Outdoor and Environmental Education. Second, a lot of people understandably want restrooms here, which the education center could provide. But there's a better alternative. Freestanding, self-cleaning restrooms such as the one Councilmember Krikorian installed in the North Hollywood Recreation Center. I've gone there, I've used them. They're well designed with automatic limited time use. Instead of constructing a building for the restrooms, let's just get the restrooms. In talking about the knoll, it's a large chunk of the limited land habitat that our complex has for wildlife. And cutting this proposed zigzag trail in it would chop up that land into even smaller pieces and promote hillside erosion. We'd like to suggest an alternative. Create a short, ADA-compliant trail that would go from the perimeter here of Armstrong to the top of the knoll overlooking the reservoir. A viewing platform could be built here with benches and telescopes. Now that's some view, right? That would cover the entire reservoir complex. This alternative would leave the hillside intact and undisturbed for wildlife while allowing people to observe and enjoy. So these suggested alternatives at the knoll are all practical and would have far fewer impacts. If you take them together, these three alternatives would meet the master plan goals of continuing outdoor education, balancing wildlife and human uses, and preserving the unique character of the knoll. When you look at the master plan's map, we encourage you to think about your own alternatives for proposed items that you could suggest to the city and our council members that would also meet the stated goals. Based on these and other possibilities, we suggest an overall alternative, the Silver Lake Reservoir's Natural Lands Preserve. This alternative would combine a migratory bird sanctuary on the waters of both reservoirs with the master plan vision of restoring native habitat. For the safety of people and wildlife, a high, wildlife-friendly perimeter fence would be maintained. This would offer flexible, daytime access for people with nighttime closure for community safety and the benefit of wildlife. It would include the master plan's wetlands, some strategically placed floating islands, and the plan's featured promenade with a buffer zone or low safety fencing between it and the water's edge, in addition to upgrading parts of the south end, including the dog park and a consideration of the new multi-use building option for community gatherings. The preserve's guiding principle would be conserving and maintaining the resources of nature and serenity that birds, wildlife, and people all seek at the reservoirs. Once the city's draft report is released, we anticipate this Natural Lands Preserve could incorporate the best of the report's mitigations and could also offer further individual alternatives. The Natural Lands Preserve would meet the master plan's goals with far fewer environmental impacts as well as lower financial costs. We believe it would also meet the community's goals for serenity, for living with wildlife, and for a livable neighborhood.